You are on the rant couch where I rant about whatever my $15 a month plus patrons want me to rant about. You can get one of these by being one of those. This one's for Paru, who says, rant about the Homestuck fandom, and particularly any specific experiences you may have had with it. The legends say that between the years 2011 and 2013, no convention goer was able to escape unsmeared by gray body paint. Are the tales true? Any thoughts on fans who applied the concept of romance quadrants to their own real-life relationships? Lastly, would you at any point in history have considered yourself a Homestuck? Okay, well, I am definitely a huge fan of Homestuck. I never participated in the community in any meaningful way because I immediately thought it was largely retarded and off base. And, like, at the time that I read Homestuck, Andrew Hussey had a Formspring account where he would address lots of questions and fan responses to the story. And it was clear that even in his opinion, the story had, gotten into the hands of an odd audience he wouldn't have expected, Because, like, it was just a lot of teenagers. Like, the people who really loved the trolls and all that, a lot of them are teenagers. The trolls are meant to be bad characters. Like, not bad characters isn't badly written, but, like, the idea of them is that each one is a parody of some kind of internet troll, some type of internet personality. And while the stories written with them are really interesting, they're not like admirable people who you should want to emulate in any way. They're definitely meant to be dumb assholes. So like, it's really funny to me that people connected so much and like wanted to, imprint these characters onto themselves so much when they're all shit. And in particular, when the second wave shows up later of all the ancestors, like, I think a lot of them were based on, like, the people who Hussey had encountered through the popularity of his story, like Carcat's ancestor being a hardcore SJW. Like, that was my first exposure to SJWs and, like, trigger warnings and all that kind of stuff, was that character who is a parody of that, And, it's just funny to think that so much of Hussey's audience legitimately was people, was Tumblr SJWs at the time when they were calling themselves that. And, that he was lampooning it in the story. Like, he had a lot of active contempt for the audience, particularly killing off Nepeta at one point because she was a stupid, obnoxious character who the fans had glommed onto because she's a cat girl. And, like, the whole point was to make fun of cat girls. And, like, so he just has her, like, unceremoniously killed and just, like, written out of the story, essentially, just to fuck with the audience, So, like, yeah, it had seemed to me like the audience of Homestuck had gotten... I mean, if you read Homestuck, it's impossible to imagine that it was as big as it was. Like, the story is insanely dense. It is very metatextual. It's got really high-minded concepts. Like, the basis of the story is all in coding and programming. All of the metaphors and everything that it's based around. The story is very complicated. It's extremely long-winded. It's mostly reading. It's just something about the fact that it was a story told mostly through instant messenger chat. And funny even still that, like, it's all text chat, which, like, the kids who were at the age of reading Homestuck when it was at the height of its popularity would have been Skype kids, like, they wouldn't have even really related to, like, what the Pester logs really felt like, which, for me, who's closer in age to Andrew Hussey, was like, oh, this is what it was like for me when I was 16, constantly in instant messenger chats, but like I was already experiencing the weirdness of like all the young kids are on Skype doing voice calls and shit, and I am not into that, So it's kind of funny to me that the audience skewed so young when it's essentially a nostalgia driven property about being in instant messenger chats. The basis of the story is Earthbound, a fucking Super Nintendo game from the 90s, the just everything about it seemed like a little more adult or a little bit more high-minded, and it seemed like the fan base of the younger audience, like, they didn't get a lot of that. Like, what they were entrenched in was more the, relating to these younger characters, sincerely taking their, their arcs. And I mean, not to say, again, these arcs are well written, and as particularly the main characters are, they're admirable people on some level, and they have really interesting character development. So I guess it's just that the storytelling was good enough to resonate with people even beyond all the meta shit. But like, people like really loving the trolls like that was strange to me. You know, it's strange to me to see as a fan of the webcomic. But I also always felt like Hussey was so measured and understanding in his own story that it didn't really need defending because he was doing such a good job of it himself, of like explaining it in more depth and helping people to completely get what he was trying to go for. Um, yeah, like the fandom was weird, and then like at cons, I wasn't really going to a lot of cons in 2011, 2013. You know, I definitely saw plenty of trolls at BronyCon. You know, I saw them around. They'd usually be in big groups of teenagers. It's just that it's an easy cosplay to do, and yeah, it is legendary that the gray body paint would ruin hotel showers and generally just get all over the fucking place, and people really hated it. And there's a lot of cons that just banned Homestuck cosplay outright because of the fact that it would fuck up hotels and shit like that. So those tales are true. People applying the romance quadrants to their real life relationships is the most retarded thing I've ever heard of in my life. Like the troll romance is literally designed to be the stupidest thing possible. Like, Hussey went out of his way to make the most convoluted, ridiculous, stupid-sounding relationship system and then have all the characters be completely obsessed with it. So all they do is constantly analyze their relationships with each other and how they fall into which quadrant and who's moved into what quadrant and all that shit. And the whole point of it is to be a parody. And none of it fucking matters, and it's all really stupid. And so, like, the fact that people care at all is like, oh no, like you're playing, it's like you've fallen for a trap, you know. It's embarrassing to think that there are people who are like that, but you know, it's also not surprising in the slightest. It's like Homestuck is like Poe's Law, the webcomic, you know, except that like if you understand, if you are able to understand all of what's happening in the comic, it should be obvious to you that it's parody, and yet if you are not able to understand the meta part of it, then it might just read as straightforward. I don't know. I don't know if the kids were doing it ironically. Maybe I'm the one duped. Maybe I'm such a fucking boomer that I don't understand the 10th level irony these kids are fucking on. But I don't know. The Homestuck fanbase always struck me as extremely weird. Very antithetical to like what I was getting out of the story, you know, like what I would see in the fan art, in the discussions and all that. The elements of the story that people seem to really gravitate towards were not the ones that I gravitated towards, you know, so for the most part. So yeah, it's interesting. I definitely would not say that I'm a part of the Homestuck fandom in that sense, but I mean, I love the story, and you know, I would love to see things come out of it that had more to do with what I think is good about it.